Så det är en glädje att hälsa er välkomna till dagens seminarium på temat Brexit. Hur påverkas forskning och högre utbildning i Storbritannien och Sverige? Och nu behöver vi ju faktiskt inte markera en klyfta mellan Sverige och Storbritannien genom att ni sitter så himla långt bort. Ni kan komma lite närmare så sluter vi närmare Storbritannien till Sverige. Ni är välkomna framåt. Seminariet anordnas av IVAs avdelning utbildning och forskning, det är avdelning 11. And I'm going to change to English as we will have one of the presentations in English. And so once again, I welcome you all to this seminar, which I hope we will find useful, even though I think many of us feel that it's very early, we are in a very early stage of discussions and there is very little factual knowledge. And some of us think that we should always base our discussions on facts, which might be difficult today. But so once again, welcome to the seminar. So what we thought would not happen has happened. Great Britain voted to leave the European Union. The US voted in Donald Trump for president. I think many of us never thought that would happen. And I think both of these developments are creating uncertainty and warrants analysis and reflections on how to meet what might happen. As Great Britain hasn't yet handed in the formal documents to withdraw from the EU and there is very little known about possible effects, we can still discuss in what ways Swedish higher education institutions can prepare for a situation with Britain outside the EU. So in our first presentation, we have a focus on the importance for Sweden of British-Swedish cooperation in higher education and research. And in our second presentation, we will widen the perspective to effects on the European arena of Brexit. And I think and I hope that we can feel that, well, this is very important for Sweden, but we are part of Europe. And so bringing in the European perspective is important for us. I hope the second presentation also will include some reflections on some issues that have been raised by the early days of the Trump administration. Before we open the general discussion of the seminar, we will have some shorter interventions from Uppsala University, from Vetenskapsrådet and Universitet och högskolerådet. I'm happy that you are all here. Unfortunately, the intervention from Vinnova will not take place. And then I hope in the end we have time enough for all of you to take part in a general discussion. We should close at 6:45 at the latest. So the report from Tillväxtanalys was written by Carl Geding and Sofia Tannegård. You have carried out an analysis of effects of Brexit for Swedish institutions, and we will now hear your report. And it's Sofia Tannegård who will present the report. So please, Sofia, the floor is yours.
Work? Yes. Thank you. I will also hold my presentation in English, since we have some foreign guests. I work for the Swedish Agency for Growth Policy Analysis. We are an independent governmental agency under the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation, and it's our job to evaluate and advise the government on growth policy in a relatively broad perspective. We are about 35 people working in our agency, and we have a head office in Östersund and a small office in Stockholm, where I and my colleague Carl work together. Last year, we did a study on Brexit and the universities. The aim was to see how British actors in higher education and research reacted to and prepared for Brexit. We wanted to see which threats and opportunities they see, what they do, but also look a little bit at what Swedish universities think about Brexit and what they do about it. The referendum was, as you know, in June last year, but the actual triggering of Article 50 and the subsequent negotiations are scheduled to begin this month. And in the meantime, the British government has quite clearly signalled for a hard Brexit, whatever that means. It seems to mean that they want to aim for full control of immigration and legislation, as well as leaving the common market. And there's also been a declaration that Parliament will have a vote on the final agreement of leaving the European Union. And you might wonder why a Swedish governmental agency takes an interest of the effects of Brexit on research and higher education. The answer is, quite simply, that cooperation with Britain in these fields are very beneficial for Swedish research and education. And British actors anonymously declare that their openness to the rest of the world is an important success factor for achieving high quality in British research as well as higher education. This is achieved through broad cooperation with researchers in other countries, as well as their ability to attract top talent from all over the world to Britain. About 5% of students in the UK are EU citizens. That makes them the second largest group of foreign students after students from Asia. And EU citizens also make up an even greater share of academic staff, 16%, and PhD students, 14%. And cooperation with Britain is very important to Swedish universities as well. Numbers are quite small, but then again, we are a small country. Last academic year, about 5,000 Swedish students studied at British universities, and it was the most popular Erasmus destination for Swedish students. At the same time, we had 852 British students studying in Sweden. And if we look at research, cooperation, and co-publication, Swedish researchers co-publish an average of 3,500 articles per year together with British authors. That makes Britain the second most important country for co-publications, after the US and right ahead of Germany. And as you know, co-publications with good foreign researchers, of course, give high citation impact. And here's an illustration of that. And citation impact can be used as a proxy for research quality. And when Swedish researchers co-publish with authors from strong research countries, the impact is much larger than for articles written by Swedish authors only. For Swedish-British co-publications, the citation impact is between 1.3 to 1.5 times higher than if the authors are only from Sweden. Thus, a close research cooperation leads to high-quality research, and student exchanges with some of the world's best universities can, of course, strengthen Swedish higher education. In other words, academic cooperation with Britain is something we should both value and promote. And turning, then to British universities, how did they react in the months following the referendum last year? Well, we spoke to some research organizations and university associations, as well as a number of British universities. And this study was by no means exhaustive, but provided a relatively unified picture of the opportunities and threats that they saw to international collaboration. The threats they perceived can be collected under three headings: talent and migration, cooperation and influence, and then financing. And as I said, international mobility is central for giving universities access to the best researchers and academic staff, as well as student recruitment. And if Brexit means raising high barriers for immigration to the UK, this is believed to hit pretty hard against the attractiveness of Britain. Moreover, there's a tangible risk that a decreased mobility of people will make it more difficult to maintain the networks that exist between British and European universities. And this, in turn, could worsen the prospects of knowledge transfers within those important networks. And on the higher education side, some universities are very worried that student mobility from the UK will decrease if they are no longer part of the Erasmus. And also, higher education is a very important export sector for the UK. And Brexit might mean that European students will find it more difficult to remain in the country during and after their studies. And European students might also lose access to student loans and British grants, which could decrease the number of European students in Britain. Despite this, though, the universities that we interviewed did not really worry about this. Those high-ranking Russell Group universities, they believe that demand will remain high for their education programs and that they will not really have any problems recruiting new students. And closely coupled with the issue of talent attraction and network is the question of how Brexit will affect the UK's international cooperation and its ability to influence research issues in the EU. Universities worry that Britain will lose participation and influence over the content and form of the framework programs. They've been a strong voice for basing financing decision on excellence, and they see a risk that Brexit will tilt the balance towards other bases of distributions. For instance, financing decisions that will be based more on regional demands and needs than academic excellence. The universities also worry about British researchers' access to EU research infrastructure and how to safeguard those parts that are today localized in the UK. But at the same time, much of the European research cooperation today take place in organizational structures outside of the EU, for example, CERN. But then again, most of the research that takes place in CERN is EU-financed research, so it's a very complicated relationship. And the last theme is financing. The British government has guaranteed existing bids within Horizon 2020, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about future access of British universities to this and future framework programs. The most research-intensive British universities primarily worry about these framework programs since they give both financing and networks to their universities. The universities that are in areas that are covered by EU structural funds, primarily in Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, also worry about that, of course. And as you may have guessed, or you may know, many British universities and their national organisations were strongly engaged against Britain leaving the EU in the run-up to the referendum. But in an effort to be somewhat more constructive, they still try to find upsides and opportunities with Brexit. Universities UK, which is the university organisation of Britain, as well as individual universities, emphasize that the referendum result has made them realize that cooperation with other universities can and should not be done only through EU mechanisms and networks, but they should also have strong bilateral cooperation agreements with other universities and research actors within the EU. Of course, there have been bilateral cooperations before for a long time, but their strategic international work and strategy has been very much focused on cooperation outside of the EU, since there's been a sense that EU takes care of cooperations within the Union sort of by itself. Another potential silver lining is that Brexit can lead to discussion on migration and visa rules in general. In the best of worlds, they hope that visa rules will be improved for researchers from all over the world, and thus make it easier for them to attract talent. However, as I said before, very little of the government signals so far has indicated that this will actually be the case. And despite of, or possibly because of, their somewhat pessimistic outlook, they are already doing quite a lot to minimize the damages of Brexit. immediately after the referendum, university organizations as well as individual universities reached out with information to staff and students, emphasizing the fact that legally nothing had changed because parents and students and staff were very worried. And Universities UK, again, work together with British Council, which they have a more general mission of promoting Britain. And together they made a tour of 16 different European cities to meet with potential students and their parents to inform them about the unchanged circumstances after the referendum. The University of Nottingham very quickly arranged an immigration workshop for its foreign academic staff. They hired legal advice and helped answer questions about immigration rules and assisted in immigration processes. And this is something we saw in several places. And this type of information is not only directed inwards to individual universities, but also outwards to potential students and staff. And universities and their organizations also work to lobby make lobbying efforts to show political actors about the threats and the opportunity that Brexit brings with it. And the British universities, as I said, are quite worried that their relations to European universities will be weakened by Brexit. So they're now very eager to strengthen those existing connections. When we started looking into what British universities do to strengthen their presence in Europe, we thought that there would be a widespread planning and opening of campuses around Europe. At least anecdotally, this seems to be the case. But when we started interviewing universities, it didn't really appear to be part of anyone's plan. However, recently, about 2 weeks ago, the European campus discussion seems to have opened up again, with the universities of Oxford and Warwick allegedly considering opening campuses in Paris, having been contacted by French universities. This could be an opportunity for them to allocate some courses and programs from England to France and to create joint degrees in research labs to secure the supply of financing, talent, and networks in Europe. These French universities are now discussing their plans with the French government, and they're in an early phase of consultation with the European Commission. But as far as we could tell, when we were speaking to British University right before Christmas, the main strategy is building strategic partnerships with selective individual universities in EU member states. That means that they want to strengthen those relations that already exist between individual researchers or research groups, earmarking resources for cooperation with selected universities and doing joint projects with them. And that type of projects can be joint summer schools for research students, joint degrees, or other mechanisms for promoting and facilitating mobility for students and staff between the different universities. And the British universities have certainly started looking outwards to Europe more than previously. Several of those we interviewed told us that Brexit had worked as a catalyst for European cooperation. It had made them aware that cooperation with universities within the EU will need to be prioritized and that they need to strengthen those networks that are so important for them. And this increased openness on behalf of British universities is visible in Sweden as well. The universities of Lund and Uppsala, they both report an increased level of activity and interest from their British partner universities. And there are several examples of British universities that have approached Swedish universities looking to strengthen their relationship. It also appears that British universities have become more interested in participating in various international university networks than they were before the referendum. But it's important to remember that this increased interest is not one-directional. Other European Union member states also show great interest in what's happening in Britain. According to Universities UK, there have been visits by delegations from other EU member states, including Denmark, who came there to get a clearer idea of the developments in Britain after the referendum. Universities UK have also themselves made several delegation trips to Germany and Poland and the Czech Republic that they probably wouldn't have done if Britain wasn't leaving the Union. So, what do we do in Sweden about this window of opportunity? Well, it seems like so far relatively little. Several Swedish universities have not really reported any direct activities, despite having quite substantial cooperation with Britain, both regarding research and student mobility. But even though they've done little so far, there is some anxiety about what will happen after Brexit. Universities worry to what extent Britain will take part in Horizon 2020 and Erasmus+. They have not so far reported any signs that Swedish researchers would be any more hesitant to cooperate with British researchers, but there are many questions around how such cooperation will be affected when they leave the European Union. And one of the risks that Swedish universities see is that there will probably be fewer incoming British students if they have to pay tuition fees. That would be negative, since British students have a positive signal value to third country students. But on the other hand, it could also mean that we get more paying students. However, that effect is probably quite small, since the number of British students in Sweden is quite low today. The UK is also the largest market for incoming tuition fee paying students in Europe. And if British universities no longer are a direct competition to Swedish universities by not being a member of the EU, then Swedish universities see an opportunity to attract more incoming third country students. Another possibility that could arise from Brexit is that it might become easier to recruit staff and researchers from Britain who would want to remain in the EU. One example of that is the vacancy for an international coordinator, which during the summer attracted unusually many applications from British candidates. But it is, of course, difficult for Swedish universities to act quickly. A strategic partnership normally needs to build on an existing relation, either between researchers or, for instance, through student exchange programs. There must be acceptance for new collaborations among university management as well as research staff. But international cooperation is important, and Sweden has a lot to gain from close cooperation with British universities. In summary, then, international cooperation and collaboration is very important for Sweden. British universities are right now eager to build strong links to individual universities, and there is an unusual opportunity right now for Sweden and Swedish universities to strengthen our cooperation with a country that has one of the world's strongest research and education sectors. The question is just how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia Tannergård, for this overview, and I think I will go straight on to the European perspective, since it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Leslie Wilson, who is Secretary General for the European University Association. And I must say I'm very happy that we've had a very long-standing cooperation, and that goes back to 2001, I think. It's not the Stone Age, but it's a very long time. And I think for me it's meant, if I may be personal, it's meant a very well-grounded European identity, I hope, but a feeling of being a European citizen. I think at this moment of time with insecurities, I think being a European citizen is an extremely important concept, and I hope we might come back to that. But I let you, Leslie, introduce EUA and also the issues that we are discussing. So I think one has to remember again that Sweden is a small part of a very big Europe, and that might be one of the themes you bring up. But anyway, welcome, Leslie. The floor is yours. Would you like some?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for this introduction, Christina. And indeed, Christina was one of our first vice presidents at the beginning of the association, and always very committed to our work. So I'm very pleased to be here. As you can hear, probably I have a Scottish accent, so Christina talked about Great Britain leaving, deciding on Brexit. But another thing I think that is quite important is that Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland and London voted massively to stay. And this is another kind of, it's not quite dormant, it's even quite a major division, and is making British politics at the moment even more complicated. But I'm not going to talk about that at the moment. I'm going to talk a little bit, just for those of you who are not aware of the European University Association. We've been around, as you can see here from the slide, since 2001. We were a merger with so we have an organisation in two parts, which I think is very important for the discussion this afternoon, because we have all 33 national rectors' conferences. So when Sophia was talking about UUK have been our partners for a very long time, and especially in these last months, the exchange has grown between our colleagues in UUK, between the Vice-Chancellors, also the Secretariat, and we have regular meetings between us, either in London, and the main Vice-Chancellors on the board of UUK visit us regularly to discuss what they're trying to do in the context of Brexit, which they didn't want, as we all know, and thinking about how they can take it forward through EUA, in the sense that we have this very large organisation with the 33 national associations and about 850 members. And so that means that from the very beginning, in fact, our joint position was we remain European. The British universities are part of our European family of universities, and in fact, that's the goal, that's the objective in future, to make sure that this story continues as successfully as it has been in the past, and hopefully will be in the future, despite all the challenges. So as I said, if we start just to look at Brexit, really it was a position that we took just to say we're all part of the same family. We've been working together for all this time, and we have a statement signed by all the national associations across Europe, including the Swedish Association, and all the presidents, all the secretaries general signed this declaration together. And I think that was, if you like, the start of our attempt to try and think, how do we go beyond that? These are important statements, important words, but what have we been looking at? I'm not going to say too much on the facts, because Sophia has made an excellent job of actually describing much of what's been going on. What I would say is that we have here we have a lovely little fact sheet which sets out some of the same kind of arguments that Sophia was making, especially in terms of it's basically showing how important the European, the British higher education and research system is to Europe. And this we all know. If you look at the number of framework programmes, and you see it's by far away most of them, I think it's about 30%, I need to go through my fact sheet, where we know that 30% of the framework programmes are actually managed and administered by UK universities. And this is also a worry at European level, because the kind of mastery of the administration of all the framework programmes is important to their success in future, and that's been one of the issues that also we have been discussing. This famous fact sheet, we actually developed it because we are working with the EU negotiators at European level. We're working with the people in Verhofstadt, Guy Verhofstadt, it's a former Belgian Prime Minister. He's working on behalf of the Parliament. He's responsible for Brexit. And the former Commissioner, Michel Barnier, he is responsible for taking the whole Brexit debate forward in the Commission. And we are actually... Our goal together with UUK is to bring the arguments that are important, to show that UK science is so intertwined with European science more generally, that it would harm Europe more generally if this were pulled apart, and that we need to find ways, hopefully that the UK government will support one way or another through the way in which they're going to take forward Brexit, but that this real cooperation through the framework programmes is in particular, but also through the student mobility programmes, it's been a way of bringing all the systems together, and that if we were to pull that apart, it would be bad for all of us. I think that's the main message in that respect. And I have to say, when we meet with these various groups responsible from the Parliament and the Council, they said, well, bring us facts. And the elements that Sophia mentioned as well about the impact factor and so forth, and the number of publications and the number of co-authored papers and so forth, these are all very important elements to show that it would be not good for Europe if these cooperations would stop. So that's, I think, where we are at the moment. Theresa May actually did say recently in her speech in Lancaster that she would be willing to have UK pay into individual programmes. And so I think that's something, that's a statement. We can take it face value. In our recent discussions with the British Vice-Chancellors, their three main issues, their three big challenges that they need to look at, and they all want to look at. One is basically staff. As you probably know, there are 3 million Europeans in the UK, 1 million Brits in Europe, and especially in the National Health Service and in the universities, there are really very high numbers. It differs from university to university, but for example, the University of Edinburgh, I know it's well over 25% of their academic staff come from Europe. And if all these folks, because as you have probably heard, one of the big issues is what happens to the 3 million in the UK and the 1 million, including me, in Europe. This is going to be an important decision, and there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment at which point in time this decision should be made. There's been lots of discussions also really recently in the House of Lords on this matter, and I think this is very much at the top of the agendas of a large number of the UK Vice-Chancellors. Secondly and thirdly, second one, of course, you would expect it's the research collaborations, the attempt or the attempt and the discussions going on to find the best way to make sure that UK universities will be able to take part in the framework programmes in future. And our understanding and what we've been looking at is, as you see here on the slide, that the association agreements are not linked to the single market, therefore that it might be better, and this is something we've been discussing in detail with UUK, that it might be better to look for an association agreement separate from any Brexit discussions that might get derailed at one time or another, and therefore damage the chances of the UK universities being able to continue to be involved in the framework programmes. Of course, for the UK universities, when they speak in our council in EUA, we're talking a lot about FP9 at the moment, and it's always the British universities that underline the principles that I think we all adhere to, and also you here in Sweden, the principle first and foremost of excellence in the framework programmes, and that's something that we must seek to maintain. So this is something that we get. There are worries from some of the UK colleagues that if Britain is out of the framework programme, that this might change in one way or another. So I think it is true to say that everyone, I mean, our European partners, even the negotiators say, well, you know, science and higher education and science, there's a certain consensus that this is good for everybody. So they are looking with a favourable eye, I think, to trying to find ways of doing this. We need to bring the facts, because the other thing that they do say, there can't be a better settlement for the UK than the situation that they have already. And so there should be no cherry picking, no special situations. So it's kind of trying to find a balance between these different elements. So that's what we are trying to do at the moment. This is the part of this fact sheet that you can look at on our website if you're interested. But it does show the situation in terms of scientific output. But that's also been mentioned by Sophia. So there we go again. We are all clear. I think we have the same conclusion. So that's a very good start. And I think I want to carry on now on a set of other issues in a way. What does it mean, all this? Not just in terms of higher education and science. We've seen that Brexit was a wake-up call in many different ways for the UK. I mean, nationalism, populism, whatever you want to call it. People were not prepared for this result. It was a huge shock to everybody, I think, especially, and this is where we come to the questions of what we mean by scientific evidence. I mean, it was the first, in the context of the Brexit discussions, we heard these words several times. You know, we don't want to listen to experts anymore. We're tired of listening to the experts. We know better. And this was part of the discussion in the days before the Brexit, because of many of the claims made by the one side or another. And in the past, one would have expected that one would have listened to those facts which were clear, but this was certainly not the case. At least many of us followed the debate on the National Health Service, which was really difficult to keep silent about. So I think this is when we come now then to the question of Trump, and as Christina said, you know, nobody expected really Trump to be elected. And I was also in Washington at the time of when he took office, and I think I've never felt as being in such a divided city ever. It was a very, very strange experience. And those academics who were present we have our partners there, the American Council on Education, the accreditation boards, and the Council for Graduate Schools. And we had several meetings at this time, and it was, I think they were just as shocked as we were after the Brexit result. And I think it's going even further in the US, because here we're really seeing a great danger of groups saying of Trump's policies being detrimental to science, to higher education. Well, we know obviously to immigration, as we've seen with the now the second executive order that he has decided to at least take one country out, Iraq. But I think the damage there has been enormous. And so the questions for us really are, what does this all mean? This is a situation that's taken place in the UK. This is a situation which is taking place in the US. And our various scientific partners, you were talking about AAAS, they're extremely worried about these developments, and how, and the question there is, how does the scientific community react? Do we keep silent? How do we try and deal with these very, very difficult developments? Climate change, it doesn't exist. It does exist. Say some, say others. There is clear a sign of decrease in finance for many different scientific endeavours, and this is what's happening at the moment. And our US partners are very, very worried about this, and so I think we probably should be as well. And I think some of the discussions that we've been having in EUA is we've been trying to think this through and ask ourselves, what's happened? What's happened? How can we try to explain it? And so basically the last, well, we could say after 1945, which was true for the US, that was the growth period for science in the US, and then the European Union, and what we've had in the 80s, 90s, and in the last decades. There's been a belief in science, the importance of education for improving our societies and for bringing economic prosperity. Same thing with open borders and exchange of ideas and exchange of people in a number of multilateral institutions. We've seen them all. I mean, we've seen the EU, whatever one thinks of it, the Bologna process, the European Research Area. These are all have been very successful in their different ways in improving the situation for education, in bringing increased funds and increased awareness of the importance of science and the importance of education across Europe. And I think in terms of the discussion on the knowledge society, this has gone forward, and we have all just assumed that this would continue to go forward and continue to take place in the same way. And I think the questions really are now: will this still take place? I think the reason, if I can say this, that the Trump executive order, the shock was so great because it was really the first time that we saw that there could possibly be a stop to open scientific cooperation. We all know scientists who come from the countries that are on the famous lists, and they can't move anymore. They can't go back to the US if they were there or come. This is. I think it's a real sea change in our environment, and it just happened. As I was saying, it was not even a political question. It suddenly we took for granted this situation, and now this situation has changed in one way or another. So the question for us is, what does this mean really for universities? Should we be more vocal? Should we take up, discuss, and respond to these challenges? Openness, is it a requirement for good research? Is it still what we want? Also looking at the various principles that we'd like to see in future. Really the fact, coming back again to the question of multilateralism, that fosters collaboration not only in Europe but in different contexts. Do we want to keep this? Is it important for us? Then we need to speak up if we want to keep these developments. We've all seen the trade discussions and how difficult they've become this last year. So we say protectionism. It doesn't necessarily support innovation. The contrary, in fact. And then last but not least, the question, it's about evidence. It's about scientific evidence. And that's the basis for which we've been carrying on our research and our teaching in universities. And so, as I say, coming back to the same question, these developments are affecting us in our work, in our teaching process, in our research, and in our international collaboration. And it's the first time in a very long time, in summary, that this has happened, and it's something we need to think about. It's very difficult to think through these processes. We're not used to being activists in this way. But I can see from, if I look back to the last year in the European University Association, well, I mean, it was the same for UUK. UUK said, my colleague Nicola Dandridge said, you know, we've never interfered politically ever. It's in the 100 years of UUK. So they decided to stand up for Remain. That was their decision. I think probably that was the very first political statement really from a university organisation. From our side, support to this, but also we have been very involved in the situation in another country. You know, we have a lot of Turkish members in EUA. We have well over, I think we have about almost 150 Turkish members, and the situation in Turkey is also, as you know, we've spoken up, we've produced, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 different statements condemning the imprisonments, all the infringements of liberty that have been taking place in Turkey. And so, I mean, that's just another example of this situation, which shows really in the Turkish case how difficult it is for universities to function in their particular context at the moment. And we've been trying to do support them as much as we could possibly. We have a Turkish board member. So all in all, that's next episode, if you like, might well be the Marches for Science that are coming up very soon. And they seem there are plans for these science marches all around the world, almost at the moment, as far as I can see. So that's one issue. We've been working with Euroscience, which is kind of the European side of the AAAS as well, and we hope to be able to continue to do that. But the question at the end is, can we stay neutral? Do we have to become involved? And if so, how can we do it? And I would also say, how can we do it together as Europeans? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that took us kind of out in outer space from a small Swedish community, and we will return for a while to the Swedish scientific or educational community, but I think when we open up a general discussion, we can come back also to a European perspective and the role of universities in many aspects, not just, well, basically, of course, research and education, but other implications of that involvement and responsibility. We have secured some shorter interventions now to look, or reflections on the Swedish situation in this in a situation with fairly little knowledge about facts. But anyway, some of the Swedish authorities or agencies have been asked by the government to analyze the present situation and look at it from a Swedish point of view, and we have also done the discussions in the universities. And so some of these we may take part of now in the next few minutes, like roughly 20 minutes. And so I would ask Eva Åkesson, who is the rector at Uppsala University, and involved in the, if I may call it, the academic discussion. We will also hear from Johan Lindell, who is head of unit for research policies at the Vetenskapsrådet, and maybe you may just want to join Eva right away. And we have Mats Embersen from Universitets- och högskolerådet, who, there you are, who also has a mission from the government to look at the situation in a wider perspective, not just from the horizon of the institutions. I think that's true for both of you, that it's not just from the point of view of institutions, but more generally. We had hoped to have also a representative from Vinnova, but there was a misunderstanding, so we have to miss that. But may I suggest that Eva Åkesson, rector of Uppsala University, you start.
Thank you very much. Well, Midsummer Eve, that was definitely a wake-up call for Sweden, I think, when we learned how the votes have actually been cast in Great Britain, and Brexit, what was we woke up to. And as you heard already a couple of times, which I will reiterate, there are a lot of question marks and uncertainties with this, what's going to happen and what changes is going to become when it comes to student exchanges and also research collaboration between Great Britain and Sweden. So that is something I think we all share, and I think I would just emphasize that again. And also, well, I'm a Vice-Chancellor Rector of Uppsala University. I have discussed this issue a little bit with my colleagues, but I will not speak for the full sector. I think it's better that I talk for Uppsala University and my own perspective, but I do think in some senses some of the things I would say could be generalized. And first of all, I would like to start to comment on the report. I do recognize myself at my university, which is luckily since he interviewed some of our co-workers at Uppsala University within this. But there's a lot of things that resonates definitely. So some of the things will probably just be that I will say again. Well, Great Britain it's a very popular study destination, even though the numbers may not in comparison be large, but we are not a large country and a large population. But it is the most popular destination in Europe when it comes to exchange programs. We have several active agreements. At the current stage, Uppsala University have 31 active agreements in the UK. So it is the most popular Erasmus destination for Swedish students. We also have, as you've seen, a lot of research collaboration, and it was shown that actually co-publication, we think definitely, at least what we see and the output there, outcome, that is a driver for high quality when we work together, and particularly with people and researchers from the Great Britain. So we have a long tradition of collaboration. But there is other things, not only research collaboration. I think within the European Union, Sweden and Great Britain, we have often been partners. We have often been on the same side. We have often thought or have this similar opinion about different issues. And I think that have been quite important when it comes to also the more administrative parts of the European Union collaboration within the Commission, but also in the Parliament and in different working groups. And losing, I think, this partnership, losing the perspective that we share, I think that can be a great loss for us in the European Union and also in the work that we're doing. And another perspective I think I do share with many is as a country like Great Britain, it is a very important both research and education country. If it leaves the Union, what will it happen to these questions? How will actually the questions about research, teaching and learning become lower on the agenda, get less importance within the European Union? I think this is a very important issue that actually the agenda will change when Great Britain leaves. So I think that is, for me, a worrying, very worrying part. And also, as has been shown here, that researchers and people from Great Britain, they do coordinate a large portion of the framework programs. They carry, I would say, heavy administrative burden for a lot of research collaboration within Europe. Maybe we have taken all this for granted, and we should maybe think about that too. And on the Swedish part, Great Britain is actually the second most important partner country within Horizon 2020. So, well, there can be. Will it mean that the researchers from Great Britain no longer can get financing, that is, and so forth? We don't really know what the consequences. But there is a great worry. But I would like to emphasize yes, it's a worry on the research part, but also this portion or the perspective of the administrative part should also be included in this. But at the same time, I would like to emphasize that research, science is international, and it will continue to be, whether Great Britain is a part of the Union or not. That nobody will take away from us, and I think that we will continue to do anyhow. And also, the research collaboration will continue because a large portion of the research collaboration that goes on between Swedish universities and Great Britain is not financed within the European Union. There are other ways to finance. So there are a lot of scientific exchange that will continue, but I will say there is a very, very large but. And so the question is, will they negotiate a similar agreement that Norway and Switzerland and so forth? We can guess, but I don't think I'm the person to actually make the best guesses here. There are probably other people in the audience that much more qualified for that. But one consequence is probably, I would guess, that the budget without Great Britain will shrink. And will we wanted to increase the member fee because of that? No, I don't think there is a common agreement with the European countries to raise the member fees. So this, I think, is definitely a problem. When I talk to colleagues around Europe, well, I do think we all share a very supportive attitude that we want to do what we can do together in this situation. And I think that is also what Leslie was testifying about here. And also what I can see, that we see more and more colleagues, Vice Chancellor, I got a lot of letters last summer, and also I have many Vice Chancellors knocking on my door. Well, now Friday I have a Vice Chancellor from Great Britain visiting and want to discuss intensified collaboration. And also this question about strategic partnership. Yes. Quite a lot of universities are coming and asking for strategic partnership in a way they didn't do before. And also, they want to participate in different kind of international networks. We have been participating of creating a European network, the Guild, and in the beginning we had a couple of great universities from Great Britain. They were maybe not so enthusiastic. I can say they are really enthusiastic, and we have a long line of universities that are applying for membership that we will turn down to the Guild. So the attitude changed, I think, overnight last summer when it comes to European and other international networks and collaborations. So what will happen? Well, I do think we can work together, continue to work. A lot of agreements, some of the agreements that we have bilateral will continue to be valid, but some have to be written in a different way, like the Erasmus different Erasmus agreements. But there are other consequences, and one is, for example, the European Medicine Agency, EMA, that we see opportunities, and I think Sweden, together with, I think, Finland, Denmark, Italy, and Spain, so far at least, have said, yes, please come here. So yes, sometimes we definitely see an opportunity, and in this case, I think Sweden have done that. But I think it's worth noting that within the Swedish Rectors Conference, there have not been a general discussion about Brexit. I actually, before this seminar, I contacted the Secretary General and asked, like, have you discussed this on the board? Have it been done anywhere? No, but we're planning to do it in the autumn. And I think this is worth thinking about. Maybe I don't know, General. It's a Swedish attitude. When there's a lot of uncertainty, then we sit down and wait. And we think that everything is going to be clear. But sometimes when it's foggy, you have to move forward to actually see something. You cannot just sit and wait. And maybe we have to stand up and move forward and take the discussion and think a little bit more. So yeah, maybe that it should be a wake-up call also for the Swedish universities. And also, when we are in a situations like this, the general, when we look back at this, is quite often that we overestimate the impact in a short perspective, but we underestimate the impact and consequences on the long perspective. And I think this might be a case. And I think the last questions that were put up here about political and being neutral are extremely important issues. And also a question, what is to be neutral and not? I would say when facts and knowledge is under attack, then, yes, the universities must stand up. Whether that is neutral or not, definitely. When you're attacking our basic values and our role in the society, we have to defend and be a critical voice in the society. Whether that is neutral or not, I don't know, but this is our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. I think you brought that forward. And so I'll quickly move to Johanna, I think. Would you take on from Eva?
Yes.
And that's the Vetenskapsrådet.
Swedish Research Council.
Yeah.
Yes, I will try to take it on from you. And seeing this as what we see, well, we have been given the assignment from the government that to analyze Brexit on a research perspective, and we will do this report together with Vinnova. We are just starting this work now, so we have not, like Growth Analysis, already produced a report. We will produce it to the government in May. So I will not be able to report from the report. So I will make some of more of a personal reflections, and starting with sort of the broader perspective, as Lester was coming into also, that the situation is very unfortunate for Sweden. We are losing one of our best allies in the European Union, our closest like-mind in most issues. So it's a blow for Sweden in a big perspective there. And it's also very untimely, this Brexit, since we are right now starting the negotiations for the next framework program. And what we are seeing is some indications on the threats of excellence in the forthcoming research program. We have seen already discussions from certain other countries, the new members of the European Union, EU 13, as they are called, and that they feel that they are not being able to attract money from the ERC and the excellence. So they feel that it is not a just system, and we need to reform this in the forthcoming framework program. Sweden, UK, and a lot of other countries, we are fighting very strong to keep excellence in a very high position in the next framework program. So now we are losing one of our best allies in these forthcoming negotiations in the next framework program. So this is very untimely for us. And that is one part. Another part is that, of course, when we look in Sweden, we have a lot of work with infrastructure, ESS, and the role of UK. I mean, working with ESS, we have a bilateral agreement with the UK. But anyway, it's within the European Union context. We got ERIC, and so there's a concern there. And there's also one part where we might think that we have already close cooperation, the need for EU, but there are parts within this European cooperation that are not depending on the European Union. For example, we got the joint program initiatives. Sweden is hosting the Secretariat for the AMR, Antimicrobial Resistant Program. This is something that is not it's not depending on the program as such, but it's of course it's a cooperation between European countries, and there's a part of it that's depending on the European Union also. So there's a lot of uncertainty, we feel. We don't know what kind of Brexit we will have. We don't know what kind of solutions we will have. Sophia, you were talking about, mentioning the UK position of a hard Brexit. And Leslie, you were saying that a hard Brexit will be bad for all of us. Yes, but there's probably a situation now where UK sort of needs to show the public a hard Brexit. On the other hand, we got the European Commission that is very eager not to be too kind to UK, because they might open a door they don't want to open. So there we got a position that two of the strong parties here are very far away, and we all here would like them to be very close to avoid a hard Brexit, to have a soft Brexit. So this is, there's a lot of things moving right now, and it's a lot of uncertainty. So the question is then, should we wait and see? No. Or should we act? And what should we act upon? Yeah. Yes. It's very difficult. in May, when we present our report, everything will be clear, of course.
Oh, hallelujah.
No,
Then we
but
see the light.
there's a lot. The Commission has presented a white book now. What would EU 27 look like? There will be the meeting on the 25th of March, where the leaders of the European Union will discuss this. And they are in the same situation. They have no clue what would it be like. And we will discuss what kind of European Union they would like to see. But it's a very difficult situation we are looking forward, I think. So it's very difficult to see what will come out of it. I would just like one more remark about the Trumpification part and the role. And I thought you said it very wise, that when education or knowledge, research is under attack, should universities be silent? No. But what kind of role should universities take? How political should universities be? Because you're moving from a certain position that you have had for hundreds of years. Do you want to become more political? Should you? Do you need to be more political? What does it mean? So it's a turbulent times. Finally, I would just like to say that UK will leave the European Union, but UK is not leaving research. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I think to a large extent research has been in the air, but even though we've talked about Erasmus and students quite a lot. But I think universitet och högskolerådet has, well, that might be my opinion, it might be completely wrong. So Mats Embersen, you put me right, but you tell us a little bit about the mission your agency has got and what kind of issues you are raising as Universitets- och högskolerådet. It's not a financing institution, it's an entirely different thing, so please.
Thank you. We have a mission much as like as yours to put out an analysis of consequences. And the tricky part is we should do it from different scenarios. And the tricky part is, what, as you mentioned, all of us, what are the scenarios? The mission, so we should cover the entire education arena, but I think I should focus on higher education right now. It's the vast part of it. We've all heard of how important Britain is for Sweden's students and teachers. Sweden is not as much as an important country for Britain in the education area, but it is somehow, it's difficult to measure really, but it is an important game anyway. So we should analyze, we should map how is mobility today, and that seems like an quite easy task to do, but you know about statistics. When you start turning them, different things turns up. But the overall picture is just like Sophia told us. Very much, quite a large number of Swedish students are going to Great Britain. Yeah, well, what would happen when, if it's a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, or something in between? You could argue for the upside would perhaps be if there are trouble for third country students entering the British university market. That could be an opportunity for Swedish universities. I mean, we have lots of programs taught in English. That could be something. But then we're leaving what you're talking about, the strategic partnership between Sweden and Britain, but that has been important and should, in some sense, continue to be important, but in another role. But in the short time, that could be an upside, perhaps in the long time too, but then a long time loss, perhaps. what will happen? I mean, lots of Swedish students are going to Britain on student loans today. What will happen if they had to pay even higher tuition fees? The amount of students would they would probably. I mean, would they go to Australia? Would they go to America? Well, we don't know. Perhaps the problem is, if I'm going back to our mission, what should the different I've just lost my I'm totally blank. Men different...
Tal på svenska.
Ja, men jag tappade på svenska också. Nej, men scenarios, different scenarios. Should it be, I mean, are we looking to a Norway way? Are we looking to a Swiss way or Turkish or USA way? But I think that the main focus should be, as you both been mentioned, there may be a rather long time that we don't know nothing about what will come. And I think that that's the main focus. How will we act and what will we do during the time that we don't know nothing? We have the Brexit period, the probably long time of negotiations, and what happened during those negotiations, we will hear nothing, really, until it's finished. It's not finished until it's finished. And that could be, well, it would take some time. And I don't think we could sit still and wait. We have to act in some way or be prepared to act. The problem is to analyze what would those paths be and what would be the best acts to take. So it's a tricky situation, but I don't think we should sit still. The $100 question is, what actions would you take? We'll try to make some kind of hearing or seminar with Swedish universities. We are to leave a report in late May, and I think we'll try to something up in April to get more input to see what these different paths could be. But it's much of guessing, not much facts, hard facts to act on. Thank you.
I take it that, well, thank you. I take it that you kind of leave us in a black box or whatever about facts. I think that's been going all through all presentations, that we lack lots of facts, but still we have to act. And I think we need to do that on different levels. We have the Swedish perspective, what can the Swedish institutions do to be well prepared? Can we gain anything from this? But it's also the broader question, how do we act in Europe and internationally in research and education? And how do we act as, or do we want to be political actors in a way? We can't just raise policy issues. We might even have to become political actors. And so there's a very broad spectrum of issues, and I would like now to ask you to remain on the stage, and if I may ask Leslie and Sophia to join you for a little while to ask, are there questions you would like to raise to each other? Absolutely. And then I think probably we have to say thank you, Leslie, because you have a taxi waiting for you at 7:15 to take you back to Brussels, and we will break up at 7:15 anyway, but I hope we will have some time for inviting everyone to take part in the discussion. But if you have issues you want to raise to each other, please go ahead. Leslie wants to start.
If I can, just one question, because I've just come back from the French University Conference, their annual conference, and we had also had a discussion a little bit about Brexit there. And so I don't think I'm giving away state secrets to say that, I mean, there now has been a long discussion. You mentioned it in terms of campuses, but I think they've probably gone off that idea at the moment. But they're looking to have some kind of collective agreement between all the French universities, the CPU, the French, and with a number of UUK members. So not just having a one-to-one cooperation, but trying to look at it from the perspective of, can we bring groups of different universities interested in, this is especially for the framework programme, so that you would have a kind of agreements between countries and their systems, and that this would help to take forward, it would give the UK universities a boost. The French, so in this case, the French would have their agreement that they would have a Franco-German partnership, but also with other countries. So it's just one option to say, if we start to agree formally that we want to work together in future on the FP9 and to have cooperations where it makes sense, depending on the universities in the particular topics of the various calls. I mean, that's all hypothetical, but on the other hand, it's quite a concrete way to go about doing things. And I could imagine, you've been saying as well that you have a lot of vice chancellors knocking at the door, but it might be something that could be thought of, not just one university, but a number of universities that see themselves or already have an experience of cooperation in the framework programmes. I don't know whether you think it's a way of trying to help both sides.
I think it's a very good idea.
Yes. Yeah, right.
That's planned. So you just bring it forward. Yes. Yeah. So you must just bring it forward. Yes, Johan?
The question is, of course, how much will you be allowed to cooperate within the European programs? Even though you've got the UK outside, you were talking about what kind of associations, agreements will you have? Will it be the Swiss model, the Norwegian model, another model? And it depends, of course, will it be a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit? How much will you be allowed? Yes. And so it's, even though we could cooperate, and we will be within the framework still. So that's it's difficult to see.
I think this was in the context also of the discussions that we've been having, that it seems pretty clear that you can separate an association agreement off from all the other elements of Brexit. And as you said, several of you, I mean, we don't know, it could, I mean, normally it's 2 years, the time span. But that's, we would try to find a way, that would be a way to allow, through a research association agreement, if the government were willing to pay for that and pay into that, then you could have these agreements coming up. It would be an association agreement, but at least that would be a start.
Yes, Eva?
Yeah, but I think it's a good idea, because I think to at least have some kind of agreement that shows the intention of the university actually can push and stress the agenda instead of just waiting and see what's going to happen and fait accompli, pannkaka, kind of. No, but actually to try to set the agenda so that the outcome would be a little bit better than the worst case scenario. So I think very good. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think if universities and university organizations are now taking care of the difficult issues, creating strategic networks or corporations, safeguarding that we will have cooperation also beyond Brexit, is that, in the worst case, creating a situation where the British government don't have to worry about it and wouldn't put money into it? I think, I mean, there are upsides and downsides on every solution, and what is in the back of my mind is, are we going to see a situation where the British government becomes, well, not Trump-like, I wouldn't like that, I mean, that's really anti-scientific, but is there a risk that Great Britain and the government will put less emphasis on research and education, cooperation? I think, I'm not talking about the situation within the country, but the emphasis on cooperation and the benefits with cooperating with other countries. One can only guess, but I mean, there is so much in the air.
What I see our colleagues from the international unit at UUK doing is they've got to hedge their bets. I mean, they're working very closely with us, but they're also working very closely. They're trying to drum up additional, or looking for additional cooperation paths in other world regions, and also in the US, although they're a bit worried about that as well, because that has its dangers in the meantime too. But
But that is a risk we can face in any country. Yeah. Always, all the time. And also thinking more and more about this discussion being political and neutral. I think the universities have always been political in one sense or another, and active on the political arena.
You think
actually?
So?
Yes.
In what ways?
Well, we're trying to lobby, we're trying to get more funding, we're trying to do this and that all the time. And we are writing debate articles, and sometimes we praise the politicians, and sometimes we are really mad at them. And I think and also we are, governmental agencies. And that is actually, we are politically governed extremely in Sweden. We do not have an autonomy in that sense. I'm a myndighetschef in the same time as a vice chancellor. So yes, we are. I would say we are totally in many ways in politics all the time. Maybe in the Swedish system, I would say too much. I think the universities ought to have much more autonomy from the state, particularly if you do not like the politicians. And that's, it's dangerous to be a governmental agency these times. I'm very happy that British and universities in the States are not governed by the same model as we are in Sweden.
I would agree. I think I'm open up. Ingrid, if you introduce yourself and use the microphone. Remember everyone?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Ingrid Peterson, and representing a financing organization for...
Lost you there.
Thank you for a very interesting seminar, and I think very thoughtful interventions. I would say I'm most afraid on the structural level. We are now going to discuss a new EU budget. Will we go back to more support to agriculture and to regions and to the structural reforms? And also we are going to negotiate a new framework program. But also I think in the day-to-day work, when we are discussing the partnership programs, I know that my co-workers, they are working a lot with their UK friends. We are working for excellence, and we are like-minded. And of course there are the universities, but also the researchers need to have funding. And now we as a financing organization also have a lot of collaboration, and I think the RC UK are among our best friends. I think that we have to act now and to try to strengthen our ties. I can see when I go, I'm the Vice President of Science Europe, I can see that people from other countries, Poland for example, they are trying to work closer to UK because quality is always attractive. So I think that it's not only the universities, but also on the funding side that we have to strengthen our ties in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to pick up? Yes, Johan?
I fully share your view, and what my intervention saying about this problem with the role or the position of excellence in the next framework program. And if we look on Horizon 2020, there's 13 billion euros going to ERC. UK receives about approximately 20% of that. What will happen when they leave? Of course, you might say that there will be more money to others of us. No. I mean, the total budget will be lower. And you will, of course, have the discussion, as you were saying, the regional aspect, the EU 13 countries that are not receiving this money, they will have a stronger case. So the structure, and that's why it's so very untimely, it is, because you will have the Brexit negotiations for 2 years, parallel with negotiations for the next P9, and they will be, I mean, they will be influencing each other and depending on each other. So it's very untimely for Brits to have.
Well, they should have thought of that. Yes. Göran. I think
well, I'm Göran Blomqvist, head of the Riksbankens Jubileumsfond, independent research funding body. It's never the right time, you know. You have to act when the circumstances around you. And when we discuss this between the research funding foundations in Europe, well, we are mostly independent from state decision and, politics. We agree fully upon that. We must continue the cooperation. UK is a leading research nation, and I think in the long run it's in the best interest of Sweden to continue to have open contacts, really. So I can see no other solution for example, for my foundation than to continue to fund cooperation with British researchers.
Well, however it's done. Let's see. I'm not sure if I can see who. Thank you.
Per Tegnér, may I ask Leslie about this question? I have worked a lot in European affairs outside research and education, and I have sometimes felt that how should I express myself? The channel is broader than the Atlantic. I mean, the alliance with US is very tight in UK, and now you have got the Trump effect, as you mentioned, and we don't know about Brexit and the details. We don't know about the Trump effect. Would Trump sort of danger to say America first, America only? Is cooperation in science and education threatened? Do you think that? Because how important is actually the UK relation with US if you compare it to the relation UK-Europe?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Leslie, it's your question, obviously.
This is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and you know, despite the accent still, I left the UK, Scotland, when I was 20, so that was a long time ago. So maybe I'm biased in the wrong way, you know. But I think for the universities at least, and it's always been like that. If I think of the initiatives under the various governments in the UK in the last few years, where there've always been the special relationship. Before Trump, I mean, this is really, and Theresa May, as you know, she went off to speak to the president as soon as he'd been elected. So I think obviously they're still trying to have this special relationship, and I know that we are present trying to come up with a transatlantic dialogue, which is difficult for EUA because the Americans and the Brits want to call it UK, Europe, and the US. And when we're trying to say we want to keep the cooperation at the European level, that is very difficult. And I think it says a lot in terms of a response to your question. So there, I mean, it's really very difficult, both for Europe to say, for us, Europe is plus the UK. We include the UK because that's the way we see science and education. But the UK now is looking to say we want a bilateral agreement or trilateral, but then Europe's the third party. And this sounds to me, this is very difficult for us to accept. But we don't know now in terms of how Trump is going to see this. Maybe he's not going to be particularly interested, and he'll leave the associations that have been carrying out this cooperation in science and education. I don't know. But all I know is from my US colleagues, they are now looking at private foundations much more than in the past to try and fund some of their initiatives, because they're very worried that the Trump administration will not be as interested as I had said previously.
Mm-hmm. Can imagine. Okay, thank you. Maybe I'm sorry, but I'll have to say thank you very much, Leslie, and allow you to go to your taxi. It's been so great having you here. So we'll see you in the future. It's a long story.
I have to excuse myself. I also have a cab. Sorry.
So yeah, thank you, Eva. I want to invite Carl, I think it was, a final intervention, and then I think we will have to sum the seminar, take it to an end.
Okay.
But yes, please.
Thanks a lot. I'm Carl Jedding. I work for Growth Analysis. I was one of the co-authors, together with Sophia, of our report. And in a report like that, you sort of want to base what you say on facts, and we all agree now that facts are roughly unknown, and we can sort of guess of which direction things are heading. But a lot of things that we want to do, this is not so much a question as a general reflection. You don't really need to have all the cards on the table and all the rules set in stone to do, because you can tell roughly what direction things are heading. And possibly we could break this down in at least 3 levels. For universities, well, I take advantage of the window of opportunity. If we have a long line of British universities knocking at our door, well, open that door and invite them, because they won't be standing in that line forever, that's for sure. And for all others, I think it's important that we minimize the damage from Brexit to maintain as close cooperation as possible. I mean, there is, of course, a temptation, both on behalf of the British government and of Europe, to be tough negotiators and not allow any cherry picking, but really that would be like cutting off your nose to spite your face, and it's our job to tell the negotiators that this is a bad idea. So in that respect, we can all be political, if you call that political. And thirdly, Sweden as a country, what could we do? We'll be as attractive as we possibly can for British and American scholars. The US gained immensely from the purge of Jewish scholars during World War II, and I'm not suggesting in any way that the situations are even remotely similar, but the same sort of mechanics, I'm sure, apply. So, I mean, if we are as attractive as possible, we will attract the best and the brightest. And what could we do about that? Well, first of all, signal that we like facts, we like science, and secondly, I mean, visa and immigration rules, we could make them as easy as humanly or legally possible. And if we could make available scholarships for the best of the brightest, I'm sure no one serious would argue that it's not a good investment. So that's, 3 sets of things that we can do without having all the facts on the table. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think we should take on the challenge of doing things, preparing things, acting on the little amount of facts that we have, but still be daring enough to go ahead. I'm going to say thank you very much, who has been able to stand on the stage till the very end, and thank you to everyone taking part, and I'm happy that so many turned up for the seminar and shared the worries, the hopes for possibilities, and also sharing both the Swedish perspective, a European perspective, and policy perspectives. And I think, as usual, all of us who are here at the meeting at the Ingenjörsvetenskapsakademin defends the opinion that we have to have fact-based, knowledge-based actions. And in this particular moment, the facts aren't that many, but still. And we also safeguard truth, trust in scientific knowledge. And if I may a little bit look forward to a seminar that we are going to have here on the 2nd of May, I think we also, and particularly maybe Eva could be a voice speaking up on the importance of scientific knowledge and bringing a respect for facts and scientific knowledge also to a young community. I think for those of us who are here, we agree, you are young, and I'm happy to see you are one of the fact lovers, but I think that's not always like that in our populations across Europe. And I think many of the elections we have seen in the US, in Britain, in some countries on the continent, and some elections coming up, that maybe scientific knowledge is not all that appreciated. That's a very prejudiced opinion, it may be, but it gives us, as an academy, I think, an opportunity to speak up and try to contribute to a development where scientific knowledge and facts are appreciated and made the basis of developments. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.